The air in the small chapel in Savannah, Georgia, was heavy with the scent of lilies and the weight of unspoken grief. A suffocating stillness broken only by the soft sobs of mourners gathered to say goodbye. It was a humid August morning in 2024, the kind of day where the heat pressed down like a physical thing, mirroring the heaviness in Emma Thompson's heart as she stood at the front of the room, her hands trembling at her sides, her eyes fixed on the open casket where her mother, Rachel Thompson, lay. Rachel had been the heart of their family, a 52-year-old school teacher with a laugh that could light up a room, a woman who'd raised Emma and her younger brother, Liam, with a fierce, unwavering love that had carried them through every storm. But now she was gone, or so they'd been told. Her life snuffed out in a car accident on a rain-slicked highway 3 days ago. A head-on collision with a drunk driver that had left her body bruised but eerily intact, her face peaceful in death, as if she were merely sleeping. The doctors at Savannah Memorial Hospital had been clear Rachel had suffered catastrophic brain trauma. Her brain activity flatlined. Her body kept alive only long enough for the family to say goodbye before they turned off the machines. She's gone, the lead neurologist had said, his voice gentle but firm, his eyes avoiding Emma's as he delivered the news. I'm so sorry. Emma, a 29-year-old graphic designer, with her mother's hazel eyes and a stubborn streak to match, had felt her world collapse in that moment, her knees buckling as Liam, just 24 and fresh out of college, caught her, his own tears silent but steady. Their father, David, had passed from cancer 5 years earlier. And now, with Rachel gone, the siblings were orphans, clinging to each other in a sea of loss. The funeral had been a blur hymns, eulogies, condolences from neighbors and colleagues. But as Emma approached the casket for her final goodbye, her heart a tangle of grief and love, something happened that would rewrite their story in a way no one could have predicted. She leaned down, her lips brushing her mother's cold forehead, whispering, "I love you, Mom," her voice breaking as tears slipped down her cheeks. And then she heard it a whisper, faint and fragile, so soft she thought she'd imagined it. "Don't let them close it." Emma froze, her breath catching in her throat, her eyes snapping to her mother's face, searching for a sign, a movement, anything to confirm what she'd heard. But Rachel's eyes were closed, her body still, and for a moment, Emma wondered if grief had driven her to madness, if the voice was just a cruel trick of her broken heart. But deep down, in a place beyond logic, she knew she'd heard her mother, and that whisper would change everything. The days leading up to the funeral had been a descent into darkness for Emma and her family, a nightmare that began with a phone call at 2:00 on a stormy Tuesday night. Emma had been asleep in her small apartment in downtown Savannah, her phone buzzing on the nightstand, the screen lighting up with a number she didn't recognize. She answered, her voice groggy, her heart sinking as a nurse from Savannah Memorial Hospital spoke on the other end, her words a hammer against Emma's fragile world. "There's been an accident. Your mother. You need to come now." Emma had thrown on a hoodie and raced to the hospital, her hands shaking on the steering wheel, the rain pounding against her windshield as she prayed for a miracle. Liam met her in the ER waiting room, his face pale, his eyes red-rimmed, and together they'd waited, hours stretching into an eternity, as doctors worked to save Rachel. The accident had been brutal. A drunk driver had crossed the median on Highway 17, slamming into Rachel's sedan as she drove home from a late parent-teacher conference, her car spinning off the road and into a ditch. She'd been airlifted to the hospital, her body battered but her face untouched, a cruel irony that made her look like she might wake up at any moment. But the scans told a different story: severe brain trauma, a coma, no hope of recovery. The doctors had called it brain death, explaining in clinical terms that Rachel's brain had ceased to function, that her body was only alive because of the ventilator, that there was nothing more they could do. "You should say your goodbyes," the neurologist had advised, his voice heavy with a sympathy that felt hollow to Emma, who'd wanted to scream, to demand a second opinion. to do anything but accept the unacceptable. Liam had nodded, his jaw tight, his hand squeezing Emma's as they walked into the ICU. The beep of the machines, a cruel metronome marking the end of their mother's life. Rachel lay in the hospital bed, her auburn hair fanned out on the pillow, her face peaceful despite the tubes and wires, her hands still warm as Emma held them, her tears falling onto the crisp white sheets. "I'm not ready, Mom," Emma had whispered, her voice breaking, her heart shattering as the doctors turned off the ventilator, as Rachel's chest stopped rising. As the room fell silent, the funeral had been planned quickly, a necessity in the Georgia heat, and the family had gathered at St. Mary's Chapel, a small, whitewashed building where Rachel had once taught Sunday school, its stained glass windows casting colored light over the pews. Emma had chosen her mother's favorite dress for the burial, a soft blue sundress with tiny daisies embroidered on the hem, a dress Rachel had worn to every summer picnic, her laughter a constant in Emma's memories. Liam had written a eulogy, his voice steady as he spoke of their mother's kindness, her strength, her love for her children. But Emma had barely heard the words, her mind lost in a fog of grief, her body moving on autopilot as she greeted mourners, accepted condolences, and prepared to say goodbye. But that whisper, "Don't let them close it," had pierced through the fog, a lifeline she couldn't ignore, a spark of hope in a darkness that had seemed absolute. Emma pulled back from the casket, her heart racing, her hands trembling as she looked at her mother's face, searching for any sign of life, any hint that what she'd heard was real. "Mom," she whispered, her voice barely audible, her fingers brushing Rachel's cheek, the skin cold, but not as cold as it should have been, not as cold as death. The mourners behind her shifted, their whispers a low hum of confusion. Some thought Emma was breaking down. Others assumed she was lost in grief, her mind playing tricks on her in a moment of unbearable loss. Liam stepped forward, his hand on her shoulder, his voice gentle but firm. "Emma, it's okay," he said, his own eyes red with tears, his face etched with worry. "She's gone. We have to let her go." But Emma shook her head, her voice rising, a desperate edge to it that made the room fall silent. "No, Liam," I heard her, she said, her words tumbling out in a rush, her eyes darting between her brother and the casket. She said, "Don't let them close it." "She's not gone," I heard her. The mourners exchanged glances, some shaking their heads, others murmuring words of pity. "Poor girl, she's in shock. It's just the grief talking." But Emma didn't care what they thought, didn't care if they believed her. She turned to the funeral director, a wiry man named Mr. Hargrove who'd been hovering nearby, his face pale, his hands clasped nervously in front of him. "Don't close it," Emma said, her voice shaking but resolute, her eyes burning with a determination that left no room for argument. "Not yet. Please." Mr. Hargrove hesitated, his gaze flickering to Liam, who looked torn between supporting his sister and accepting the reality they'd been given. But before he could respond, a voice cut through the tension, a soft, steady voice that belonged to Sarah Mitchell, a nurse from Savannah Memorial who'd attended the funeral out of respect for Rachel, a patient she'd cared for in her final hours. Sarah stepped forward, her scrubs traded for a black dress, her blonde hair pulled back in a tight bun, her face a mix of concern and curiosity. "Let me check," she said, her voice calm but firm, her hands already moving as she approached the casket, her training kicking in despite the surrealness of the moment. The room held its breath as Sarah leaned over Rachel, her fingers pressing gently against her neck, her eyes narrowing as she searched for a pulse that shouldn't have been there, that couldn't have been there. But then her expression changed, her breath catching, as she noticed something a faint, almost imperceptible flutter of Rachel's eyelids, a movement so small it could have been a trick of the light. But to Sarah, it was a sign, a clue that something was terribly wrong. "She's alive," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling, her hands shaking as she turned to the crowd, her words a bombshell that shattered the silence like glass. "She's not brain dead. She's paralyzed." We need to get her to the hospital. Now, chaos erupted. Mourners gasping. Liam stumbling back, his face drained of color, while Emma stood frozen, her heart pounding with a mix of hope and terror, a mother's whisper echoing in her mind as the room descended into pandemonium. A whisper that had just saved a life. The ambulance arrived within minutes, its sirens cutting through the humid air as paramedics rushed into the chapel, their equipment clattering against the wooden floor, their voices sharp with urgency as they worked to stabilize Rachel. Emma stood by the casket, her hands clasped together, her nails digging into her palms, as she watched the paramedics intubate her mother. Their movements swift and precise, their faces grim but focused. Sarah stayed by Rachel's side, relaying what she knew to the team suspected locked-in syndrome, a rare condition where the patient is fully conscious but unable to move or communicate except through eye movements, a condition the hospital had missed in their rush to declare Rachel brain dead. Liam stood beside Emma, his arm around her shoulders. His voice choked with emotion as he whispered, "You were right, Eng. You heard her." The ride to Savannah Memorial was a blur. Emma and Liam following in Emma's car, their hands clasped in the front seat, their hearts pounding with a hope they hadn't dared to feel since that awful night in the ICU. At the hospital, Rachel was rushed into emergency surgery, a team of neurologists working to address the swelling in her brain that had caused her paralysis, a swelling that had been misdiagnosed as brain death in the chaos of her initial treatment. Emma and Liam waited in the same waiting room where they'd said their first goodbye, the sterile white walls and the hum of the vending machine. A cruel reminder of that night. But this time, there was a flicker of light in the darkness, a chance they hadn't had before. Hours stretched into an eternity. But finally, the lead surgeon emerged, her face tired but triumphant, her words, a miracle. Emma would never forget. She's going to make it. Rachel survived. Her recovery, a long and grueling process. Months of physical therapy, speech therapy, and rehabilitation to regain the movement and speech that had been stolen from her. But she was alive, her laughter returning in small, precious bursts, her hazel eyes bright with the same love that had always defined her. The hospital launched a full investigation into the misdiagnosis, uncovering a series of errors, overworked staff, inadequate training on rare neurological conditions, a failure to perform a second EEG that would have detected Rachel's brain activity. The findings led to sweeping changes at Savannah Memorial, new protocols for diagnosing brain death, mandatory training on locked-in syndrome, and a review of all recent cases to ensure no other patient had been misdiagnosed. The hospital issued a public apology, their statement a testament to the power of one woman's intuition, one daughter's love, Emma, who'd spent those months by her mother's side, holding her hand through every therapy session, reading her favorite books aloud, playing her favorite songs, felt a weight lift from her shoulders, a weight she'd carried since that first phone call. Rachel's survival was a miracle, but it was also a testament to Emma's refusal to let go, to the bond between her mother and daughter that had defied death itself. On a quiet evening in the spring of 2025, as Rachel sat in her wheelchair in the garden of their family home, her hand steady enough now to hold a cup of tea, she looked at Emma, her voice soft but clear, her words a gift that brought tears to Emma's eyes. "I knew you'd hear me," she said, her smile radiant, her love a bridge that had brought her back from the brink. Emma knelt beside her, her own smile trembling, her heart full as she replied, "I'll always hear you, Mom." Their story became a beacon of hope, a reminder that love can see what science cannot, that a whisper can change everything, and that sometimes the greatest miracles are born from the smallest acts of faith.